Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle powered by PGC Basketball. We believe in the value of a coach. We're here to educate, empower, and encourage you to lead like never before. With the season gearing up, this week TJ and I discuss what we're going through in our respective preseasons. Your strategy and philosophy are often tested early, and we look at the decisions coaches are making when it comes to defensive reads, player development, and getting the right data to evaluate where you're at in the beginning stages of your season. Let's get started.
Coaches, welcome to the Hardwood Hustle. Today we've got a kind of different slant on the way we do things. And so rather than just kind of have a specific topic, we're going to chop it up here a little bit. Things that you can learn, things that we're learning. You know, Lisa and I are going to talk through a little bit of our preseasons, like what's going on in the preseason, what did we think going in versus what did we learn, how have things changed after we've scrimmaged once or twice, how did our mind change? Because as coaches, this is what you're doing, this is what you're living is, you know, you come in, you have some plans, and then maybe things change a little bit. Maybe you're far ahead on something, way behind on something else. How do you make the right adjustments? How do you make the next step in your preseason? So, you know, I'm working with my team, and Lisa, University of Montana, she's working with her team. And so we've got some questions that we're just going to chop up that would help you maybe process some of your things that you're thinking about with your team. So, Lisa, first of all, excited to be doing the episode with you.
Hey, thanks, TJ. Glad to be here this morning.
And for those that don't know, she's now at the University of Montana where she just took over there as assistant. And so she's back in. She was at St. Mary's before, came full-time with us, and now we're still working together part-time, but then she's doing her back into her coaching job. And so first, before we even jump into that, I think some things that would be helpful, because I think this is more of like a nuggets show. There's just going to be a lot of little nuggets that people are going to be able to pick up. But going back in, and for those people that maybe for the first time are having like a new assistant come on or going to be a new assistant, what are some of the things that you think people could take away that you've learned? We've already shared a couple of these things off air, but I thought they'd be really interesting for people to hear on air is like, hey, when I go in, I'm in this new job, how do I approach it? Or I'm the head coach and I've got a new assistant. What things would be helpful or harmful to you? What are your new learnings that you've gotten?
Yeah, I would just, as I'm thinking about the experience and how it's gone and it being a part of a totally different program than what I was a part of a few years ago, and having obviously that break too, where I just got to talk to coaches, do the coaching clinics with you guys, doing the Hardwood Hustle, helping out a sixth grade team last year, doing a little bit of high school stuff this summer, and now being back at Division I. It's just been quite a journey. And so jumping into it, I was a little, of course excited, but also nervous about what is this going to look like? How am I going to fit in? How long does it take, as a first time assistant, you have this growing period. I mean, you've never coached before and you're part of an established program. Where do I find my voice? Where do I provide value? And I had the benefit of being part of the program for 3 years before that. So I knew really well what we wanted to do, how we like to do it, what kind of kids we like to recruit, what our, cultural values were. And then jumping into this being totally, just new. And my head coach has only been here for 1 year, so he's still establishing some stuff. And I think the one thing I've appreciated the most is just being able to know, like, what's the main thing? Because we talk about a lot, like, keep the main thing, or how are we going to win? I think as a head coach, if you're bringing somebody on the staff, like making sure you can articulate that, share that, emphasize that, and being able to, answer questions along the way of, hey, is this important or not important? And I think as an assistant coach, you might misinterpret something. You might jump in and say, oh, well, he said it one time, so it's like the thing all the time. But if you ask the question, you go, let me just double check first. And you find out, oh, they actually, that's not a detail that we're prioritizing right now, or that's not an emphasis that we're worried about, whether it's a player development thing, an X's and O's thing, because sometimes it's hard as a head coach, and maybe TJ, you can share a little bit about this, of sometimes you have a plan in your head and you don't always share it right away. So you don't always come into the office and say, hey, this is the schedule for the day and here's what practice is going to be like. And, here's where we're going in the next 3 months. Cause maybe you're still figuring some things out, but you know what you want and you have a vision in mind. And I think it's fair to say it's not always, written down and perfectly planned out. But as an assistant coach, I think it's best to not assume and fill in the gaps yourself, especially when you're new. I think just ask the question, hey, are we getting, does this matter now? And it's like, hey, no, actually, we just need to focus on this because we're going to worry about that in 3 weeks or in March or in February. And you're like, oh, okay. And I just think that keeps everybody on the same page, which is really important.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think oftentimes as a head coach, you do have a vision, and that vision can be shifting, right? You see something in your team. You might have this plan of how you want your team to operate. Like we just finished our first scrimmage, I know you just finished yours. And, until they actually go out there and play, you have your plan. And then when you see them play, your plan might change a little bit. Like for good or for bad, you realize, gosh, this is going to be a problem. Or, gosh, I didn't realize we had that strength. And I do think it's really important for staff to be on the same page, especially when there's shift in focus, because there might be a focus going in. Now that focus shifts a little bit. And it's not always the easiest thing. I'm not always great at that by any means because I don't always get everything out of my head. My head's working a million different ways. I've got this thought and that thought and this thought and that. And it's hard for me sometimes to just sit down and say, okay, I have this thought and that thought and share it with everybody. But I think it's more effective when everybody has a real clear vision of where you're going. And so I think it's important sometimes just to write that down and work it out, because if you've got everybody rowing in the same direction, you're probably going to get there a little bit faster, as a staff, because they might be emphasizing something that's not as near as important to you as it might be to them. And so moving on to that particular topic of like the shifting, like thinking about how things flow and developing what's best for your team. That's a really interesting process to go through, because I think some coaches come out, and tell me if you disagree, they come out and they've just got this plan laid out. I'm doing this, 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 this. Other coaches, I think, sometimes are more adaptable, more flexible, and they realize, well, I really wanted to do that, but that maybe not the strength of our team. And I think there's strength in both. I think sometimes just having a plan, and just sticking to it can be effective. But I also think sometimes being flexible, adaptable, teachable can also be really effective. Before we go deeper into that, where do you think you would land? Like, would you be one of those people that's like, this is what we're doing and we stick with it? And the other person being the opposite of that is like, hey, I've got a general idea of who we want to be, but I'm also going to let this play out a little bit. Where would you land? And would you favor one over the other?
Gosh, this one's kind of hard because I'm in a situation where I think right now I'm learning a ton and I'm learning a different way of doing things, which is exactly what I would want. Take going from one experience where I was part of a program for 9 years and being brand new. Like I want to see a different way, and I want to see. I think it works both ways, and so you see success on both ends of different styles of coaching, different systems and strategies options, and so I can't think I came from a place where it was, this is who we are, this is how we play, this is what we do, and we don't need to change. We just need to be great at what we're good at. We just need to, focus on the same things. We need to kind of like maintain and set a really high standard, just go, and so there wasn't really looking back. There might have been some adjustments game to game, here and there throughout the season. But I feel like now I'm in a part of a program where we ask that question a lot. What could we do better? What, are we getting the ball in the right spots? Can we, what adjustments should we be making? And it's a different way of thinking of like, man, we could really shift a lot of things in late October or maybe even early December. And I think that flexibility there's strength in that. Like there's strength in both, really,
Yeah,
like
I was going to
100%.
say, I think I agree. Because I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. One of the things, like, if you're one of those people that like ask questions all the time, you're trying to fix things, right? Man, sometimes you can be good at a lot of things, not great at some things, and right. And the other one is like you can be great at some things, but not flexible and adaptable enough to win different styles of play or different games or adapt to your team's strengths. And so you're right. I mean, there is something about like we play teams that like they hang their hat on a few things. They do it well every single time. That's what they're going to do, and they're going to live and die by that, right? And then other times when you play, which I think is more in line with who we are, think we win a lot of different styles of games, fast, slow, whatever, because we're adaptable. We go through that. But I mean, our weakness would probably be that like we don't have absolutely hang your hat on these two or three things every single time, and we do those well every game, every practice, every day. And so again, not wrong. Neither one is wrong, but it is an interesting conundrum like to be in. Like, what do I do? Because I know if you're my type of coach, I am. What sounds like maybe you're in that situation a little bit right now. Is you see endless options and you've got to choose something. You got to land on something, because you see tons of options. And the other one who already has their plan, they don't see a lot of options. They're just doing what they're doing. And so the bad thing is they may miss a lot of things. The good thing is they're going to hit a home run in those particular areas. And so, I mean, I think a lot of times I wish sometimes I was the other coach, and probably sometimes the other coach wishes they, coached the way that we did. I think both are good. I think you make a good point there.
Yeah, and what's come to mind too for me a little bit is just like player development. It's a lot more. It's the messaging and like the things that you work on the court. I think become really clear when you have a set way of. It's just kind of like who's going to step up. We need some player to do these things that fit this, and we're going to work on those. And then we need to get more in the gym more. And you just know, and especially when you've done it for a long time, you're like, this is the path, right? And then the other path is, well, shoot, like we're adapting and we had you work on this and now we need you to be good at this. Especially when some of your better players who can do a lot of different things, you kind of have to shift their focus. But I know that like with that, when your coach has a little bit more, flexibility or adaptability or able to change things, like you said, you can get into some game situations and your players are ready for it. You know, it's been challenging, I would say, just because it's so different to think about. Like you said, I think you can get a little overwhelmed with the options, but I also think when you've done it for a long time, you find your menu that fits. And I think as you get better at that and that realm or that little box of, okay, yes, I don't have one way, but I have a handful that I really know how to coach well or I've done before and I've seen players been able to do it. I think that obviously leads to more things in the long term.
Yeah. So at what point, as coaches are going through their season, at what point do you need to land on certainty? You know what I mean? Like, this is always really intriguing to me. I think a lot of people, I mean, everyone has a different preseason. And so, like, I think about it sometimes, or I know we're high school coaches. I was talking to a couple last week, and some of them don't play their first game till like December 1st, and so they have a longer preseason. Some people go have tryouts, and then 2 weeks later, they're playing a game, or 10 days later they're playing a game. And so I oftentimes wonder, like, if you're playing a game in 10 days and you start your preseason, do you have to have certainty then? Because I know in like college, you and I, we just finished our first scrimmage and we're probably another 2 or 3 weeks. And so we kind of figured out our team, and now we kind of got to get a little bit more certain after we got more feedback. But, or does it matter? Like, I think this sometimes, like, basketball is a tournament game. And can you continue that process on through the tournament? And that might be something that coaches need to think about, because let's just say that, you're a one bid league in college, and winning that tournament is going to be crucial. And so you want to grow throughout the year to try and go to the NCAA tournament. Well, in high school, that could be like, listen, I don't think we're coming out of the gates dominant, but we want to finish strong so that we get the 2 seed at least, so that we cross over and play our first game at home, which will allow it. Like, so I think coaches have to actually think that deep, because if you're a team that it's going to come down to just a game or two here, you're the two best teams. How do we get to a place of clarity quicker? Because we all know that players play faster, more efficient when they have clarity, right? And so it can be messy before they have clarity. But when do you need extreme clarity? I think can sometimes be based on what is your end goal. If you have a young team, as another example, like, okay, I know it's going to take some time for us to get there, but we would really like to be peaking at the end come tournament time and go. Like, maybe you don't have to have clarity from day one, but you have to have 50% of the idea done, and then you start growing that. So I do think it's important that coaches recognize their team, their league, what's important to you, to figure out how fast you need to get to clarity. Because would you agree at some point you have to get to clarity so everybody knows exactly what is expected of them?
Yeah, I think that gives players a lot of peace of mind and it gives them confidence, right? If they can go into a game being like, this is who we are, this is how we're gonna win, this is even the confidence to say, hey, if it starts to not go well or we need to make an adjustment, I know my coach is gonna be able to do that. And that gives you a lot of confidence too. Like we talk about it. Hey, do what we're asking you to do, and if the defense does something different, or they try something different, like that's on us as coaches and we'll make an adjustment. But I think that builds trust when you can say, here, this is the plan, go out and execute, and we'll be ready, we'll be right there with you the whole time. I think that clarity, like you said, just leads to better execution, but also hopefully even better adjustments, because when you execute it well, then you know how to shift.
Yeah.
If you have bad execution, then you have to ask yourself, well, do we need to execute better or do we need to do something different? Like, I think that's the first thing.
Yeah. Let's give another tangible example is, when we scrimmaged just this past week, and I know you did as well, like what are some things that you saw? Like for me, um, there was things that I saw that we worked on that showed up. And there was also things that didn't go well that I thought when I really backed up from it, we didn't spend a lot of time on that. And so I think that a lot of times if you haven't made a decision as a coach, like if you were to go in a scrimmage and you've already made a decision, you know that certain things should be happening. One of the tougher decisions, if you're kind of a slow roll, figuring out your team as you go, is do I get rid of that thing or do I double down? Now we need to put a lot of time into it. And I know as for me as a coach, that's like we're watching film, breaking it down and saying, maybe we just don't need to do that. Or we do need to do that, but we're not any good at it. And we need to really get working on it. And so give some examples of things that you might see in a team that you think, gosh, like, all right, should we or should we not spend more time on this? Or should we put our time elsewhere?
Well, here's a good one I want to get your opinion on. Either defensively or offensively, when you give your player the option. So maybe on defense, coming defending a down screen or a stagger screen, we say you can go over or you can go through the gate or you can
Mm,
chase, right? And you got to read it. You got to read where the ball is. You got to read the situation. Whereas if you tell your player, you're always chasing off a stagger, or you're always going to go through the gate on the first one and chase the second one. There's strength in that. There's clarity. There's everybody knows who's supposed to be doing what at what time. And when you give the option to read a situation, same with coming off an on ball, same with defending an on ball in certain situations where there and I think there's strength in saying we're not good at it right now, but our players are going to get better at it. That by February or March they know how to read it better. But man, it can lead to a lot of messiness in the beginning when you're giving your players an option to read a situation, especially defensively. So, what do you do with that, TJ? I'm just wondering, like, do you fall in the sense of this is how we're defending this situation, or you could say, hey, if there's space to go over the screen, you need to go over, or if there's this is the situation, you have to play it based on how they're running it
yeah.
and who you're guarding. Right? There's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. And that same situation just on us, like guarding ball screens. Well, if they don't get through, then you can switch it if they get hit, right? And then if they get through, then you don't have to switch it on particular ball screens. And what happened in the scrimmage is there's miscommunication. I mean, our biggest defensive problem was miscommunication, in both options. So at the end of the year, what would be best is if we didn't have to switch, but we were good at switching, right? Like that would be the best. So, but then that leaves gray area for players. Now, the problem with switching it every time is there's going to be a matchup. And the problem with not being able to switch it if you get in trouble is sometimes you're not going to get there and they're going to turn the corner. Like that could be any defensive situation. And so there takes patience to give them options. It takes a lot of patience to give them options. And so that's where we err. That's what we do because I think your ceiling is higher at the end of the year. But it can also be really frustrating early in the year because you're going to give up a lot of buckets in different situations that they're going to make mistakes because they didn't have 100% clarity. But for instance, like the one you said in the double stagger, well, by the end of the year, you could be shooting that gap, getting a couple steals that lead to buckets that change your whole game, right? Or you can just continue trailing it, doing it every single time and being solid and getting ever. So it's like you're not giving up a lot on that, but you're not getting a lot back out of it. And so there's return on investment, good or bad. And I do think it's important for coaches to make that decision and to know that if you only do it one way and you do it that way every single time, there's a ceiling on that. And if you decide you give options, you got to be patient enough to work through the growth.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Just like, are you going to double down on it? Have you done it before? Do you trust it? And that's where you can rely on your coaching staff to talk you through it. Maybe some veteran players to be like, what do you feel comfortable with? Because obviously, the ones who've been doing it, they should feel the most comfortable. And I do think the players appreciate understanding, like, hey, I'm the one out here on the floor, and like you said, the ceiling is higher. Like, I can make the play that makes the most sense. But coach, you got to teach me. You got to help me. We got to watch film. We got to know the difference. We got to scout. So, yeah, that was just a big one for me that stood out. Of like, we have to double down on some of these things where we're teaching it better, we're communicating it better, we're recognizing the situation better, and yeah, I think that's where we would land rather than okay, we have to do it like this every time. And I've seen the strength in both, but like I said, the second
Yeah.
one, like you said, has a higher ceiling, especially at the end of the year.
Yeah. Doing it that way every single time is, again, there's nothing wrong with it. And sometimes you see these teams, they do that every single time and they're really good at what they do. Eventually you might run into a team that's really well prepared that you don't have a counter. You don't know what to do if they don't take that. You might just be like, well, this is just what we do. I mean, I've seen teams go in and this is just what we do, and they just lose that way, and they just but they're going to hang their hat. And now they might win a couple other games because they do it so well, but then they come up against a team and the other side of that is like a team like us. Like, I think we're not as good early as we are late, because late in the year we have more options because we found a few things. Now we've got more options than the other team, but it takes patience and it can make you want to pull your hair out. And I think the other one that we spend more time on too is, like we said this before, but does your player development match what you're trying to get done offensively and defensively? And I think that's a big one, whether you're either type of these coaches. So you need to, as quickly as you can, get the players working on the things that they're going to do the most in your offense. Now, if you are one of those flexible, adaptable coaches, your player development might change a little bit. And I don't ever feel good about that. I always wish we were better at that, is that, we're trying to teach multiple things on offense and trying to get them good at a lot of things, which the positive is it makes a more complete player. The negative is sometimes they got too many choices, too many options. They don't just do that one thing we want them to do really well. And so that can give them a little bit of confusion, as an offensive player. But what are your thoughts on that? Because you just mentioned it earlier, and I thought it's a pretty interesting situation to be in. Is like, there's certain teams I know that we play that I know they work on that shot all the time, all of the time, right? And then our guys might have this shot or that shot or that shot. And now you're trying to work on three things versus one thing. What's the positives and negatives of that?
Well, first thing that came to mind when you were talking was just habits. So what are the core habits or fundamentals of basketball, your offense? Certain players what they need, or when it comes down to how you catch the ball, like those little things. As we were looking at the scrimmage, I was like, man, our habits just aren't there yet, and those win in any situation. So making sure you have that first, and then the second piece is, I don't know, give them what they're ready for. I don't think everybody's player development should be the same. And so that's where, like, how do you prioritize your time, or how do you communicate that to individual players? Because your freshmen need to go really stick with the habits, stick with the fundamentals. What are we doing in these situations? Because even on a drive to the basket, do they have the right footwork? Can they be in control and jump stop in the paint? And like those work in any offense or any broken play or motion or continuity, right? So I think then you get your veteran players who you're going to ask to take some tougher shots, or you're going to get something in your offense. And so you have to work on what you're doing right now, and you can't always plan ahead. But whatever, that one's hard for me, TJ. I want to hear your answer. But I think whatever you're asking them to do, they would have had to practice and be successful at it first.
Yeah, and I think this one of the things really important here is age stage, is we have listeners at all different ages and stages, right? Like, I wish more young coaches would err on the side of options and players are doing more, but it's messy because that's how they're going to grow. But I think a lot of times, like, my answer to this one is for sixth graders. Like, I would have them doing as much and failing as much as possible and trying to develop as much of their game, and as they get older, then you start to narrow the focus a little bit on what's good. And so in college, like, I think at some point, we want to be flexible, adaptable, but we should by some point know our players' games and know that, like, they're in the last 2 years of their career, 3 years of their career. Are we still trying to teach them a whole bunch of new tricks? Probably not. But what is the reason that people go? Like, you can be real. Take a sixth grade game, and I coached my daughter's seventh grade last year. It was hard. It was very hard because I feel like there's a lot of situations I could have put them in to go win a game, but didn't coexist with their growth. I mean, just for instance, like practice time. I mean, like in practice time, like we wanted to work on skills and habits. We went into our first game. We hadn't even put inbounds underneath in. We hadn't put side out of bounds. We hadn't, and I feel like there's a lot of things I could have scripted up and made the ball go to this person and we would have got that win. But like, they're in seventh grade. Like, they got to keep developing. Now, I know there's going to come a point, but I think most coaches feel like their job is to win the game. And there's this pressure that we put on people. So they oftentimes become the more decisive. We're going to run flex, or we're going to run a ball screen for this girl every time, or we're going to do whatever. And the people aren't developing. So I think that's super important as the age and stage is. And that's one. And the second one is, where are you at in the season? You can't be halfway through the season and still searching. There's got to be some clarity, maybe not 100%, but 85, 90%, like what you're working on is translating to game every single time. So I do think it varies for everybody. And I definitely think it varies age and stage, that how much you should be limited to like specifics that fit your systems and strategies.
Yeah, and a couple of things that come to mind is where people are catching the ball on the floor. If you have somebody catching it in the low post, we talked about posting up guards on, I think, our last episode a couple ago, and then catching at the high post, that looks a little bit different. Being the shooter in the corner versus coming off screens, and so coaches can be thinking about some of the skills that they're asking their players to perform, and are they really able to do those things at a high level or at a level they need to, and what habits do they need to be successful at that all of the time? Because I think that's where, have we prepared and equipped our players for these situations where they're going to find themselves in a game?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you what I would say, and this is what we're working on right now. But here's what I'm going to say to me would be the perfect scenario, all right, of what kind of coach you should be. And I'm not saying I'm this at all. But what if on offense and defense, you had three things on each or two things on each you were just absolutely going to hang your hat on? And everybody's got to be good at this. And we're going to focus on this every time. With some of the other stuff, we have a little bit of flexibility and adaptability, because if I was anything, I'm a little bit more flexible, adaptable too much versus these specific things. And then that oftentimes find coaches, again, like we talked about, that are just not flexible at all. And here's the things we're going to do. And they can't adjust their team. And so the place I'm trying to land right now is, whether it's two things or whether it's three things. And we just got done meeting this as a staff in the office about this. Is like, what are the things that we are absolutely going to hang our hat on? Because here, when you have extreme clarity, now you go play, and that should be accountable every day. Like we should now be able to measure that. Like when we go back, if we're hanging our hat on rebounding, well, how can we measure that? We can measure it by number of rebounds we can get. We can measure it by number of box outs that were hit on every possession. We can there should be some certain things that everybody has great clarity on, so that we can measure it, so that we can see if we're actually making progress in it. So you can't leave everything out in the open. Well, we'll just decide, well, we're just going to check and go. Okay, well, we're going to box out sometimes, but then if they don't go, I'm not telling you what, but make some decisions on some things so that you can measure those and have flexibility and adaptability and some other things. And that to me would be the right happy medium of good coaching is, here's what we hang our hat on, but here's where we're flexible and adaptable. If you were to ask me right now, I can't tell you that. And so that's bad coaching on my part. Like, that's what we were meeting about. Like, I'm thinking, yeah, we've been flexible and adaptable, but now we had a scrimmage. Now we're a couple weeks away from a game. We need to now know, like we need to now make some decisions. And that's why, I felt a little bit convicted of that this morning. There does need to be more of that because there's too much it's ambiguous and too many people, too many decisions right now.
Yeah, and the word that you just said early on there was accountability. Like, do you have something that you can hold them accountable to? And that's not like, the coach calling them out. It's giving them a standard to reach, right? And say, how are we doing it? How are we going to evaluate ourselves? One of the questions we have is, how did we do in the scrimmage? Well, I need some data points. And without a stat sheet necessarily, which we didn't happen to have in this last one, like I looked back at the film and I was like, I have to chart something. I need some data. How many times did we do this? What percentage of the time did we do that? And that's super helpful to me because it's easy as a coach to sit there and be like, well, I don't think we used the on ball very well. Well, what does that mean? How many times did you use it well? Is that something you need to double down on, or is it something that you need to move away from? The without the data, without the evaluation and accountability, like I think, like you said, our coaching can be a little muddied.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I think can be helpful in that, like, I really do think, right, you said data is really good. And it doesn't have to be expert data. You know what I mean? At the college level, we get better data, but you can easily go down. Like, if you were to go play a scrimmage and just write down, okay, they scored because Lisa didn't get to the help. Okay. They scored because Sally gambled. Okay, they scored whatever. Like that data you can put all those in there and be like, holy cow, Sally's got a lot of problems. Holy cow, whatever. A lot of times it's not what you think until you actually write it down. Or it could be individual, or it could be like, we were late to the help 16 times. Okay, that tells you I need to go do this, because it's really easy to watch a film, not have any information on it, and be like, so and so's, just not getting to the help side. And then you go watch film. Well, actually, that happened twice. And one of those times, it wasn't even actually their help. It was kind of confusing on there. Well, maybe it's not a bigger problem as you think it is, but that one place sticks out in your mind as it was a big problem. And so, coaches, again, you don't have to have huge, great, deep data to just go down and write what problems happen the most. Okay, well, this happens the most is something we need to work on. What happened well for us? This happened really well for us. How many times did it happen? Oh, we were great at offensive rebounding. Well, how many did you get? We got 6. Well, maybe you weren't great at offensive rebound, but those 3 that you got were putbacks you felt good about. So the old saying, feel is not always real. This is where it's important to get some data, some film, and going down and breaking that stuff up. And that's what we're doing, in our film right now. But Lisa, any final thoughts on this, on how coaches can kind of marry the adaptable and flexible with actually having concrete accountabilities, and like, what's the right mix?
Not really. Heck no. As I'm journeying through it, like I'm asking all these questions myself, and
Yeah.
so I'm hesitant to give any, straightforward advice. But I think one thing that sticks out to me is being able to help your players focus on what they need to focus on. Because I think as they're learning, there's just a lot going on. And so, what are the main things? And emphasize those and know what those are. And that's my question, as in, it's like we were talking early on in the episode. If you don't know, ask. And if your head coach doesn't know, talk about it as a staff and make sure you're all on the same page so that you're not sending 17 different messages out to your players, especially early on. Like, how can we hone in on what we're all going to be focusing on right now, whether that's in the general period of time, in this practice, in this week, for this game? Those messages need to be the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And 2 pieces of advice I would give. One I already said, and another one, one would be like, make sure that they're, from a coaching staff to to the players, they do know what they are accountable to, right? Whether that's 1 thing, 3 things, and then you can get into 8 things, but that's maybe too much. Like, what's the right number? You land where you think, age, stage, your team, all that. Like, they're things that they're accountable for. And also, don't be so everything is accountable and they got to be good at all these things where you're not flexible and you're not adaptable. That's the place I would land. And then the second thing is, be able to differentiate all the things you're thinking and knowing and all the things you're deciding on, don't let that muddy over into practice where there's not high clarity in practice, because that can cause confusion within the players. So like while you're behind the scenes working on 1,000 different things, try not to let that carry over to practice where there's not high clarity in practice. And I'm guilty of that sometimes. I think probably all of us are, but we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to work on this, we need to do that. But then all of a sudden your practices don't have high clarity. Then you're going to find yourself not getting good at the things that you said that they should be most accountable for. So you can still be flexible, adaptable, learning, scheming, figuring things out on the back end. But then you got to come together as a united front with united points for united accountability when you get to practice. So coaches, love to hear your thoughts at Hardwood_hustle, as obviously Lisa and I don't have it figured out and we're still trying to figure it out. We could use some help here. And I think most of us are probably in that boat as coaches, like trying to figure this out and trying to make the equation a little bit better. Probably never going to be perfect, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. But thanks for listening. Hey, she is Lisa. I am TJ. We are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. Be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Hardwood_hustle to stay up to date on the latest episodes and share your thoughts with our coaching community. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.